Parents used my college fund to buy my brother a car. I've always been the kind of person who plans ahead. I like knowing where I'm going, what I need to do to get there, and that I'm taking every step to make sure I'm ready for whatever life throws my way. College was supposed to be my ticket to the future I'd been working towards since I was a kid. The scholarship money, the small side jobs, the late-night study sessions. I'd put in the effort because I knew it would pay off. I had one big safety net, my college fund. It wasn't the largest amount of money in the world, but it was enough to make a difference. It was supposed to help me cover tuition, books, and living expenses for the next few years. It wasn't a luxury, but it was a lifeline, and I'd been counting on it every single day. That's why I felt a sharp knot of confusion and anger in my stomach. The day I overheard my mom on the phone with Aunt Sarah, I had come home early from my part-time job, hoping to get a bit of rest before my next class, when I passed through the living room and heard her talking in hushed tones. Normally, I wouldn't have paid much attention, but the conversation made me freeze in my tracks. I think it was the right decision, Sarah. Jake really needed it. You know how he's been struggling with school, and this car will give him the independence he needs. Plus, it'll help him with his job. I tried to sneak a look, but the words that followed hit me like a ton of bricks. Yeah, we took it from Daniel's fund. We didn't want him to feel like we were choosing Jake over him, but Jake was in such a bad place. We figured he could get a job and focus on his future with that car. And Daniel's been doing well with his scholarships anyway. My heart skipped a beat. I couldn't process what I had just heard. I must have misheard. Maybe they were talking about something else, something unrelated to me. I walked quietly to the kitchen, hoping to get some distance from the conversation, but my mind was already racing. My brother Jake had always been the more reckless one. We were 2 years apart, but we felt like we were from different worlds sometimes. Where I'd stayed focused on school and worked hard to earn the opportunities I had, Jake had always been the kind of person who got by on charm and impulsiveness. He never seemed to take anything seriously, especially his studies. He got by with the bare minimum and relied on the people around him to bail him out when things got tough. But now my college fund was being used for a car for him? It didn't make any sense. My parents had always told me how important my education was. They'd always encouraged me to aim for the best schools, take the tough classes, and build a future I could be proud of. But suddenly, they'd taken what I had been counting on and used it for Jake's new car? I tried to shake the thoughts out of my head. Maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe there was more to the situation than what I had heard. After all, my parents weren't the type to make impulsive decisions like that. Were they? But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself it wasn't true, the words kept echoing in my mind. We took it from Daniel's fund. And then I thought about Jake, his lack of effort, his always being the fun one in the family who could get away with anything. The more I thought about it, the more it started to feel like a slap in the face. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling of betrayal growing inside me. I had worked for everything I had. I had sacrificed. My future had been shaped by my choices, my sacrifices, and now it seemed like everything had been taken away. I needed to know more. I needed to hear it from them. Not just a passing conversation overheard in the kitchen. I needed to understand why they thought it was okay to take my hard-earned money, the money that was supposed to ensure my future, and spend it on Jake's car. As I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the cold cup of coffee in front of me, I tried to come up with a plan. Should I wait until later to talk to them? Should I approach this calmly, or should I just demand answers right now? I didn't know how to handle this. The betrayal hurt too much. It was late that evening before I finally gathered the courage to confront them. I could hear them in the living room, talking softly, probably watching TV, and I took one last deep breath before walking into the room. The knot in my stomach had tightened, but there was no turning back now. I couldn't pretend I didn't know. "Mom, Dad," I started, my voice shaky but firm. "We need to talk." They both turned to look at me, surprised by the seriousness in my tone. My mom set down her book, and my dad paused the TV. They exchanged a quick look, and I could see the guilt on their faces. They knew what was coming. "What's wrong, son?" Dad asked, his voice calm, but I could tell he was nervous. Mom was already wiping her hands on a dish towel, and I couldn't help but notice the way her eyes darted around the room, avoiding mine. "I overheard you talking to Aunt Sarah earlier," I said, my voice growing more confident. "About Jake's car. You said you used my college fund to buy it. Is that true?" The room was dead silent. My mom's face went pale, and my dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I felt the tension in the air, thick and heavy, like everyone knew this conversation was coming, but nobody wanted to have it. Finally, Dad cleared his throat and spoke. "Son, I think we need to explain." And just like that, the dam broke. I was about to find out everything. My dad shifted in his chair, avoiding eye contact with me. I could see the hesitation in his eyes, the way he fumbled for the right words. My mom looked like she was about to burst into tears at any second. The weight of the situation hung in the air, suffocating us all. "Son," Dad started, his voice quieter now, as though he were carefully choosing his words. "We didn't mean for it to be like this. We didn't want to hurt you." My frustration was bubbling up to the surface, but I forced myself to stay calm. I needed answers, not more apologies. How could you do this? My entire future is tied to that fund. You took it for a car, for Jake? What about me? What about the sacrifices I've made to get into college? Mom finally spoke, her voice trembling. "We didn't want you to feel burdened. You've always been so independent. You've had scholarships and we thought you didn't need it. We didn't want you to feel like we were giving you special treatment." Her words hit me like a slap. "You thought I didn't need it?" I repeated, almost unable to believe it. "I've worked so hard for that money. I've saved every penny I could. I've taken out loans to make sure I could get through school. And you..." I pointed toward the living room window, as if hoping the words would make more sense if I spread them out. "You thought I didn't need it? And Jake, he needed a car? He can barely even keep his grades up." I could see my mom flinch at the mention of Jake's grades, but she didn't interrupt. I could tell she was struggling to find the right thing to say. Dad spoke up again, his voice more strained now. "It wasn't just about the car, Daniel. We've been watching Jake struggle for so long, and we thought this would help him get back on track. He needs something to give him confidence, something that'll make him feel like he's not always falling behind. He's been slipping through the cracks for years now, and we just wanted to do something to make him feel better about himself." I felt like the air had been knocked out of my lungs. "And you thought I wouldn't need my future? You thought I wouldn't need the money I've worked for?" The anger was growing inside me again, but I was trying to control it. I couldn't let them see how hurt I really was. It was too much. Jake's face appeared in the doorway. He had been standing there for a few moments, probably hearing bits of the conversation. His hair was tousled, and he looked confused, as though he was trying to figure out whether he was supposed to be part of this conversation or not. "What's going on?" Jake asked, his voice quieter than usual, as though he wasn't sure if he was welcome to ask. I glared at him. "Oh, you finally decided to show up? You knew about this, didn't you?" Jake hesitated, looking between me and our parents, unsure of how to respond. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, trying not to let the bitterness slip into my words. "You knew they were using my college fund to buy you a car, didn't you?" His face reddened instantly, and he took a step back. "I didn't know about your fund, man. I swear to God, I didn't. He paused, his voice faltering. "I didn't ask for it. You've got to believe me." I stared at him, disbelief written all over my face. "So, you just happened to get a brand new car out of nowhere, and you didn't know about it? Do you really expect me to believe that?" Jake's eyes widened, and he shook his head, looking genuinely upset. "Look, I didn't know. I didn't ask for it. I didn't even think I deserved it. You know I've been struggling with school, but I didn't think they'd..." "Of course you didn't," I interrupted. "It's easy when things just fall into your lap, right? Meanwhile, I'm over here working my ass off, and you get rewarded for doing nothing." I regretted the words as soon as they left my mouth, but I couldn't take them back. The frustration I had been holding in for so long was spilling out, uncontrollable. I felt betrayed, like my entire world. Jake's face hardened, and for a second it seemed like he was about to argue. But then, to my surprise, he dropped his shoulders and looked away, his eyes not meeting mine. "I didn't ask for it, man," he said quietly. "But I didn't know they were using your money for it. If I'd known, I would have told them to stop." I blinked, taken aback by his admission. For a moment, he seemed more like the younger brother I remembered, someone who hadn't yet figured out how to navigate the world, but still someone I cared about in a strange way. My anger softened for a split second, but then reality hit me again. I turned back to my parents, my voice colder now. "You couldn't even come to me. You couldn't ask if it was okay. You just took it." Mom wiped at her eyes, her voice barely audible. "Daniel, we didn't know how to ask. We thought you'd say no. We didn't want to put that pressure on you. And Jake has been struggling for so long. We just wanted to help him." "By taking everything I've been working for?" I shot back, the words laced with venom now. "You didn't even consider how this would affect me. My future doesn't matter to you." The silence in the room was suffocating. I could see the regret on their faces, the guilt that was now written on every inch of them. But it didn't change the fact that what they'd done was irreversible. I didn't know how to forgive them, not yet. Dad sighed heavily, rubbing his face. "We're sorry, son. We didn't think it through. We'll make it right. We'll find a way to pay you back. We'll do whatever it takes to fix this." But I wasn't sure I could believe him. How could I? The damage was done, and now I had to figure out what it all meant for me, for my future. I turned to walk away, my heart heavy in my chest. But before I reached the door, I heard Jake call after me. "Dan, I didn't ask for this. Please don't hate me." The words hit harder than I expected. I turned back to face him, trying to read the sincerity in his eyes. But all I could see was a world that had suddenly tilted sideways, leaving me to wonder if things would ever be the same again. The next few days felt like I was walking through a fog. I couldn't think clearly, couldn't focus. Every time I tried to concentrate on my homework or think about the future, all I could picture was the car, Jake's new car, sitting in our driveway. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jake had been struggling to keep up with his studies, his grades barely passing, and yet there it was, a shiny new car, a symbol of the family's misguided decision. Meanwhile, I was left to pick up the pieces of my shattered trust. I tried to keep my distance. I didn't want to talk to my parents, didn't want to face the guilt in their eyes. I couldn't stand how they'd justified their decision. I couldn't believe they'd taken my college fund and used it for Jake, without even asking me, without even considering what it might mean for my future. Jake, for his part, seemed genuinely remorseful. But it didn't matter. The damage had been done. He didn't ask for it, he said, but he wasn't the one who needed to be apologizing. I spent the next few days holed up in my room, avoiding everyone. It wasn't easy, especially since we all lived under the same roof. But I needed space. I needed to think. My head was spinning with questions I couldn't answer. How could they do this to me? Why didn't they even ask? And most of all, what am I supposed to do now? The tension between my family and me grew palpable. Every meal felt like a battle of wills. My parents kept apologizing, offering promises to pay me back, but the more they spoke, the emptier their words sounded. I didn't want their apologies. I wanted the money they had taken from me. I wanted to know why they had thought they could make that decision for me. Then came the night when my mom called me down to the living room. She said she wanted to talk. I hesitated, standing at the top of the stairs, listening to the sound of her voice below. My heart was pounding, but I had no choice. I needed to hear what they had to say. I had to know if there was any possibility of making this right. When I walked into the living room, my mom was sitting on the couch, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes looking down at the floor. My dad was standing by the window, his posture tense. It felt like the calm before the storm. "Sit down, Daniel," my mom said softly, motioning to the chair beside her. "Please." I sat, my hands clenched in my lap. I didn't want to hear more apologies, but I couldn't leave without knowing how they were going to fix this. I needed to know that they understood the weight of what they had done. "Daniel," my dad began, his voice steady but edged with regret. "We've been talking about what happened, and we realized we made a huge mistake. It was wrong. We never should have touched your college fund without talking to you first." I bit my lip, trying to hold back the bitterness that surged in me. "That's the understatement of the century, Dad. What were you thinking?" My mom's eyes filled with tears. "We thought we were doing the right thing for Jake, but we were wrong. We didn't think about how it would affect you. We didn't even think about your future. And for that, I am so sorry." I wanted to scream at her, to tell her how much she'd hurt me, how much they'd both hurt me. But instead, I just sat there, stewing in the silence. I couldn't bring myself to forgive them yet. I didn't know if I ever would. "We're going to fix this," Dad said more forcefully this time, like he was trying to convince both of us and himself. "We'll take out a loan if we have to. We'll do whatever it takes to make it right." But I wasn't sure if it was enough. How could they repay something like this? How could they fix the broken trust? The money didn't even feel like the issue anymore. It was the principle. They had crossed a line. They had taken something that wasn't theirs to touch, something that had been set aside specifically for my future. No amount of money could make up for that. "I don't know if that's enough," I said, the words finally coming out in a low, broken voice. "I don't think you understand. It's not just about the money. It's about the fact that you didn't even ask me. You didn't trust me enough to come to me with this. And that's what really hurts." My mom's face crumpled at my words, and she reached for my hand. "We should have trusted you, Daniel. We should have. But we let our emotions get the best of us. We thought we were helping Jake, but we ended up hurting you." I shook my head, feeling the weight of it all sinking in. "And Jake? How does he feel about all of this?" My dad glanced at Jake, who was sitting in the doorway, looking lost. He hadn't said much since the confrontation, and I could tell he was struggling with guilt, though I wasn't sure if he fully understood the gravity of the situation. "I didn't ask for this," Jake mumbled. "I don't deserve it. I never wanted you to be hurt." I stared at him for a long moment. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to tell him that he should have fought harder, should have put a stop to it. But the other part of me knew that he wasn't the one who had made the decision. It wasn't Jake's fault. He didn't ask for a car, and he didn't force them to use my fund. The blame wasn't entirely on him, it was on all of us. "It's not about you, Jake," I said softly. "It's about what they did, and the fact that I don't think I can trust them anymore." The room was quiet after that, the air thick with unspoken words. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but I knew that things between me and my family would never be the same. I had learned something important, that sometimes the people you love the most can hurt you in ways you never thought possible. And it takes more than a few words of apology to fix that. I stood up, my mind made up. "I need space. I don't know how long it's going to take for me to forgive you, but I can't do this right now. I need time to figure things out." With that, I turned and walked out of the room, my heart heavy but resolute. I had no idea what the future held, but one thing was clear. I couldn't just move on from this, not yet. And maybe, just maybe, I never would. The following weeks were a blur of emotions, leaving me both exhausted and numb. I did my best to keep a distance from my family, trying to focus on schoolwork, though it was hard to concentrate with everything else swirling in my mind. Every day felt like walking on a tightrope. My parents continued to apologize, to promise they'd make things right, but the damage lingered in the air between us. Jake, on the other hand, seemed to retreat further into himself. I wasn't sure if it was guilt or just his usual avoidance of conflict, but I couldn't help but notice that he wasn't as carefree as he usually was. I'd always been the responsible one, the one who took life seriously, worked hard, and planned for the future. Jake had always been the opposite, carefree, the one who coasted by with a laid-back attitude and relied on his charm to get by. It wasn't always easy, but I'd accepted it. He was my younger brother, and even though he made mistakes, I loved him. I still did, even though it didn't feel like enough to erase the hurt from what had happened. The turning point came one evening, a week after the confrontation, when I found myself sitting alone in the living room. My parents had gone out for dinner, leaving Jake and me at home. He was sitting on the couch, flipping through channels, but there was a weight in the air that neither of us had addressed. I had been waiting for a moment like this, the right time to speak up, but I hadn't known how to begin. Maybe tonight would be different. Jake glanced over at me, his eyes tired, as if he was carrying the same heaviness I was. "You want to talk about it?" he asked quietly. I wasn't expecting that. For a moment, I thought I'd heard him wrong, but I could see in his eyes that he was serious. The invitation hung in the air, and I knew I couldn't let this moment slip by. "I don't know what to say," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "It feels like everything has changed, and I don't know if I can go back to the way things were." "You don't even understand how much this hurts, Jake." Jake swallowed hard and sat up straighter. He wasn't avoiding me this time. "I know, I really do. I didn't want things to go this way. I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't even ask for the car. I didn't ask for any of this to happen." I looked at him, my anger slowly melting into a deep sadness. "I know you didn't ask for it, but that doesn't change the fact that it happened. They used my money for you, Jake, my future. It's not just about a car. It's about me being able to go to college, to have a life outside of here." "I know, man," Jake said, his voice small now. "I know, and I'm sorry. I don't want to make excuses, but I guess I've just felt lost. It's hard, you know? I've been trying to figure out who I am and what I want. And sometimes, I just feel like nothing is working out." I was quiet for a moment, processing his words. I had always seen Jake as the easygoing one, the one who seemed to have it all figured out, the one who didn't care about the future because the present was enough for him. But hearing him admit that he was struggling in his own way, that he felt lost too, it took me by surprise. "I get it," I finally said, my voice softer now, "but it still doesn't make what happened right. You've got to understand that. I worked so hard to get to where I am, and I don't know if I can just move on from this." Jake nodded, his expression one of shame. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Dan. I don't expect you to just forget about it. But can you at least understand that I didn't want to be part of this mess? I didn't want to be the reason everything went wrong." I sighed deeply, leaning back in my chair. I wasn't sure what to say. I wanted to scream, to tell him that none of this would have happened if he had just worked harder, if he had taken things more seriously. But the truth was, I knew it wasn't all his fault. My parents had made the decision, and they had dragged him into it. They had used him as an excuse, a way to justify their actions. "I don't know if I can," I said honestly. "I don't know if I can forgive Mom and Dad, and I don't know if I can forgive you either." Jake looked at me, his eyes wide with hurt. "I'm sorry, Dan, I really am. But I just want you to know that I don't want to be the one who ruins your future. I'm not that guy. I want you to go to college. I want you to succeed. I just don't know how to fix what's been broken." For a long moment, I didn't say anything. His words hung in the air, and I could feel my heart beating harder in my chest. I had always been the one who held everything together, the one who pushed forward no matter what. But maybe, just maybe, Jake was right. Maybe I didn't need to carry all of this on my own. Maybe I could let go of some of the anger. Maybe I could start to see the situation for what it was. A family in crisis, not a villain in the story. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Jake," I said finally, my voice quiet, "but I'm willing to try." Jake looked at me for a long time, his face softening, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw a glimpse of the brother I once knew, the one who I had shared everything with, the one who used to be my partner in crime. "Thanks, Dan," he said, his voice full of emotion. "That means more than you know." It wasn't the perfect resolution, but it was a step in the right direction. I didn't know what the future held for us, or for our family. I didn't know if I could fully let go of the hurt, but at least, for the first time in a long while, I felt a small weight lift from my chest. Maybe we could find a way forward, together.